We're good. So we're just going to be talking about acceptance. So acceptance, I'm just going to draw this here. So acceptance is oftentimes talked about as the remedy for other people's sort of things that they do, or the universe, the things that it throws our way. You can just accept it, then it's okay. And oftentimes the issue is acceptance gets equated with awareness. But acceptance does not result from simply awareness. There's a bit of a process of coming to acceptance, and typically that involves compassion. An act of forgiveness, which gives you the neutrality of acceptance. And so the thing about acceptance is, what is it that we're trying to achieve with acceptance? How does it help? And the classical question that always comes up is, should we accept things that are like transgressions of our boundaries? Should we accept these? If someone transgresses our boundaries, should we just say, oh, it's fine? And oftentimes that just kind of creates a bigger problem down the road. And so I think from a trauma lens, what I would ask you to think about is the idea of loose ends and the concept of completion. So that kind of sounds a bit mysterious. Acceptance is a one way of achieving completion. Completion is a very basic human tendency. In psychology, they call it an action tendency. A series of thoughts, going from pre-thought to thought to complex thought to plan, action, which gives you completion. So the neat thing about our neurobiology in our mind is that when there's a completion, the whole thing gets filed away somewhere properly. It doesn't bother you, you don't think about it. When you're hungry and you eat something, the hunger goes away. The process of finding food, about cooking it, about planning it, consuming it, and then actually finishing with that act of consumption and that satisfaction gives you this sense of completion. And so a lot of folks, they think that action is the only thing that matters, i.e. how we act in the world. If I have a fantasy or a nasty thought about someone and I don't act on it and no one ever finds out, then that thought is irrelevant. And that's actually not true. A lot of obsession happens when things get improperly paused where they shouldn't. Let's say it doesn't. You have a thought. Let's say it is, this person wronged me. But that's a thought. That's probably true. You didn't follow through or weren't allowed to follow through with an expression of that. And the brain doesn't take well to that. It just kind of keeps looping back and forward again and again and again, obsessively, until you sort of, distract. And then it seems to go away, but as you learn from the subconscious garbage can, it doesn't actually. It just gets deposited as a thing in there. And over time, you fill up your can. So the reason that these obsessive thoughts persist is that they were on a trajectory that was going towards completion, but they got interrupted somewhere. They got interrupted because people weren't allowed to express what they needed, what they felt. They got interrupted because they chose not to. For whatever reason, it got interrupted. And what the mind does is it creates a loop, and that thing keeps coming back. And trauma is like that. So what is trauma? Trauma, most of the time, actually all the time, is when there's sequences of events. There's three things that you need, actually. I'll just briefly mention this. There's three things that you need for something to be traumatic. And you need all three. So two of the three, it's not traumatic. Or it's not going to result in the deposition of chronic emotional material inappropriately in your long-term memory circuits, which is what trauma is. So the three conditions of trauma are, one is a negative event. Second is a sense of powerlessness. Or lack of control. And then the third is inadequate support. So these are kind of three pillars that hold up trauma. And if you don't have two of the three, the whole thing falls over and it doesn't actually result in anything. And so when there's a negative event, let's say someone pushes you and you're too afraid to say, that hurt, how come you did that? And I didn't appreciate that, which is assertive. But you didn't say it, you stuffed it. For whatever reason, you stuffed it. Then there's a negative event, you're powerless, and most of the time when that happens, and you didn't say it to that person, but then later on you go home to a loved one, and you say, yeah, this happened, and then they shut you down, oh, it's your fault, or oh, it's not a big deal. Then you get these three things happening. Because the negative event set a train of thought in motion that needed to progress towards completion, which is an authentic expression of self, and just got interrupted. And because it got interrupted, it just continues to cycle endlessly. And it will be endless until someone passes away or until they deal with it. It's a fascinating thing about trauma, is that it is always permanent and stored as a permanent looping thing. It's kind of a funny brain mechanic. And that thing will continue until you proceed to some form of completion. So that completion might be 20 years later, in a therapist's office with, imagining, like, this is called the two-chair technique, where you just imagine the other person who grieved you in the other chair, and you tell them what you think. And you get it off your chest, and that completes the process. The emotion then gets expressed, and the obsession lessens. And when that obsession lessens, that it gives you a form of acceptance. And so all of trauma work, all of trauma therapy, really all of recovery, all of therapy is really about getting good with the past and being able to move on from the past, so that you can live a vibrant life that is, your greatest potential. But the stuff of the past needs completion, and these obsessive thoughts, if you can complete them, but there's many ways to complete. I was meditating. I remember in residency I delivered a stillborn, 22-week-old infant, and and what happened was that I thought the whole thing was kind of weird. It was the mother was kind of numbed out, and I was just kind of a doctor doing what doctors do, which is deliver, and unfortunately, it's an unfortunate situation, but it wasn't happening to me, and so I didn't think it was a big deal in terms of my emotional health. But later on, years later on, I was in the middle of meditation, and then one day, all of a sudden I had a very vivid flashback to the whole thing. Felt an immense amount of shame, presumably because I was powerless to do anything about that horrible situation. And then I just had to feel the feeling, and then I let it go. And as I let it go, I can now think about that situation and not have disturbance. So it was a form of completion. That form of completion just meant acknowledging the feelings and feeling the feelings, which many years ago I didn't have the skills for, but now I do in meditation, and I was able to do it in a meditative place. Completion can be, a lot of 12-step groups. You can get completion from, religion, and etc., etc. Now, the reason why this is helpful to tie to acceptance is that the feedback loop. So how does this tie to acceptance? Well, let's say someone does something bad to you, and you say to yourself in the moment, well, you know what? This person's had a pretty hard life. It's not personal. It's not about me. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna accept this as I did the natural disaster. And a politician called me once, said to me that, you must be getting a lot of calls because of that $1 billion hailstorm that happened last summer. People with disturbed mental health and all that. I don't think we got one call from that. Not one. Because people are, they accepted it as a natural disaster. Natural disaster happens. It's not personal. It takes a pretty confused mental sort of situation to view the weather as against you. It happens, for sure. But in general, most folks will sort of say the weather's the weather. No one sent the weather. It's just, it is what it is. But I told that politician, I told her, I'll tell you what we do get a lot of calls for. It's like my uncle didn't attend my wedding 20 years ago. Lots of calls about stuff like that. My wedding day was, my in-laws said this to me, or or as a child this happened. Tons of calls about stuff like that. Because it's viewed as personal. All of these years in this field, I've learned that hurt people hurt people. And so acceptance is about acknowledging that if we're being victimized, it's not personal. It's a universe thing. People are acting out. If we say to ourselves that this is more akin to a natural disaster, which I just gotta, what do you do in a natural disaster? You protect yourself. You weather the storm. You set out your boundaries and try your best. And you know that it's gonna pass someday, and that all you can do is your best. And then hopefully it does pass. That's what you have to do in a natural disaster. And if you're in a boundary situation with someone, that remembering this thing that hurt people is a helpful way to remind yourself that, it is this person's acting this way, and it's not I'm the recipient of it, but they're doing this not because I'm bad or because they're intrinsically bad, but rather they are and a product of their experiences just like I am. And with that, you can achieve completion. Acceptance is a perspective that allows for completion in the moment. And if you practice that, then all of a sudden, we talk about, having like a lake of onions to peel, and we're constantly peeling trauma onions, things that happen to us. But when we adopt an attitude of acceptance, what we're doing is, we have our lake, but when a new onion comes, we're just kind of peeling it super fast so it doesn't end up contributing to the, being another one inside the lake. It keeps our subconscious from getting even more burdened. And I'll tell you, people who do really well in trauma processing are ones that cultivate the ability to forgive, the ability to accept without needing necessarily an apology from the other person, because the other person might be dead, might be in jail, might be just really mentally deranged and not even acknowledging there was a problem. There's a lot of that. But an attitude of acceptance is highly predictive of successful and relatively shorter journeys through mental illness and addiction. And so that's the reason for it, is because acceptance allows us to achieve completion of sort of past things, and completion allows us to sort of move on. And that's one of the things we talk more about later on, is this cycle. I won't spoil that for later. Actually, I think it's another YouTube video that I got up on here. So I'm just going to pause this thing.